Hi everybody, I'm Peter Laws and this is the Flicks the Church Forgot, the place where I explore the deeper and occasionally spiritual themes of horror movies. Tonight I'd like to introduce you to my dead pig. He's called Fiddlysticks and he foolishly slinked himself into a lawnmower blade and he didn't quite make it. And he's been dead for quite a few days now, which is why he's especially interested in the film we're going to be looking at tonight, aren't you, Fiddlysticks? You see, tonight we're going to be looking at an exhaustively detailed documentary called Unearthed and Untold. Yes, it's the path to Pet Sematary. Oh, Pet Sematary. The tale of a young doctor called Dr. Lewis Creed, who along with his family move into a beautiful new house that happens to be near an incredibly dangerous road with trucks hammering past every few minutes. There's so much roadkill on this stretch that the locals have made a quirky little graveyard for the family pets that get lost on this road and all other deaths that come to their pets. And this graveyard, this pet cemetery, turns out to be even more quirky than anybody imagined. You see, when the doctor buries his recently deceased cat, he discovers that the ground up there, or rather the ground beyond up there, is sour and has the ability to bring the dead back to life. Only the dead aren't quite themselves when they return. It's a film and a novel that has had a big effect on me when I was a teenager when I first saw it, and it turns out that I'm not the only one to have felt the impact of Pet Sematary. Because John Campopiano, I think that's how you say his name, and Justin White have put together a massively detailed love letter to the film, and so in the first part of this multi-part episode, I'll be commenting on the documentary itself, Unearthed and Untold, which I watched last night, and then I'll continue exploring that film in part 2, but in that I will give more space to revisit, reference, and review the actual film that inspired it, Pet Sematary itself. So first up, join me as we check out Unearthed and Untold, the path to Pet Sematary.
I wrote a book called Pet Sematary. When I finished the book, I actually put it in a drawer because I didn't think anybody would want to read anything like that, but they did.
I first read the Pet Sematary script when I was an executive at Embassy Pictures. I left Embassy in 1985 to become an executive at Paramount, and I tried to get Pet Sematary made, but the prevailing opinion in those years was that the time for Stephen King movies had come and gone.
Ready, and go.
He doesn't just write a scary monster in the closet story. It's always a psychological aspect to it.
It was one of those films that you find with a group of friends and you all immediately love it.
It was a woman directing a horror film.
It made my career as a film director. It's still my most successful film.
I went in on the callback with her, and because of child labor laws at the time, I think that probably helped.
Miko Hughes was in a really important part of this film.
Paramount was not happy. They wanted twins. Shoot it, schedule it.
I didn't find actually that working with the child very difficult at all. The cats were another story altogether.
I've always loved Fred Gwynne. He was an amazing actor.
What? He'd like to play this? It was Fred Gwynne.
He's the one that sets the whole story in motion.
When I learned that he had written a book based on My Pet Sematary, it was really quite mind-boggling.
You can see something like that and get the beginnings of the story.
I knew this fictional character. This was real flesh and blood.
All the people who died in this film you cared about.
Pet Sematary is really a timeless story.
The Zelda scene is my favorite. I mean, that scared it out of me.
Rachel.
Don't screw up a shot there because, you know, these people are going to be really angry with you if you do.
They said, don't worry, we're not going to burn the other house down.
They assured me that nothing would go wrong.
Dale actually got a second-degree burn. It felt like the fire was right in my face.
He lunges in, he bites it, pulls it off. Fred's going, oh! And Miko freaked out.
I really wanted to pull it off. It was very claustrophobic.
I think I enjoy watching Pet Sematary the most. It's the easiest to disconnect myself from it. It took another year or so before I was able to watch it from the beginning to the end.
You have got to go to Midtown to see Pet Sematary. She said there was a whole crowd of kids that went, jump, bitch!
It's such a specific moment in time that I hardly remember, and yet it seems to have affected a generation of people that it's just amazing to me that it can be so powerful.
Well, at least something could come of it. This place. Couldn't plant nothing but corpses here anyway, I guess.
Unearthed and Untold has been 5 years in the making, and it's been eagerly awaited by horror fans worldwide. It's on general release in October of this year, that's 2016, which seems like eons away, but fans of the film can pick up a special DVD and Blu-ray copy of this in a very funky bundle at $39.99. Now, I know that sounds a lot, but it does come with a t-shirt and a poster, and of course the film itself with extras. Now, that might sound like an odd and convoluted way of getting the film into your hands, but this is, remember, an independent production. It's not made by some big studio, and so they're using this crowdfunding model to get it out there early to fans in a sort of limited edition type release, but then it will come out in October on digital platforms. So I guess the question is it worth it? Is it worth investing in, or indeed is it worth watching? Does it live up to the promise of an extensive look at a classic horror film? Well, I'm pleased to say that you don't need to worry. It is an excellent documentary. They have done a cracking job of nailing down the elements that make the film Pet Sematary so memorable to so many people. And in so doing, they've made a documentary which in and of itself is a fascinating little time capsule of that era, that film in particular, and especially the place where it was made. Now, the press screener I watched clocked in at around 1 hour 37 minutes, so unlike some documentaries that bill themselves as feature length, I've seen some that say they're feature length and they've lasted about 60 minutes. This one actually is the length of a proper movie, so you won't be disappointed with the length. And it consists of a series of talking head interviews and on-set footage, images and home video. Literally everything you can think of that you can legally include, they put here. Now, the film does actually lack footage from Pet Sematary itself. There's no actual clips from the film. However, the directors have been clearly conscious, I think, of this, so they've compensated for the lack of film clips by using all manner of imagery and visuals, so that the film never feels like you're only listening to people talk. It's a kind of feast for the eyes as well as the ears. And so the bulk of the film is talking head interviews, and I've seen a fair amount of horror documentaries that employ this interview method. Blu-ray extras are often like this, with a horror director or actor or someone explaining how they made the film, sitting in their lounge or in a cinema chair, and it's all just them for 20 minutes or so. It's what this podcast is in many ways, this YouTube show. Arrow Video in the UK do this quite a lot. Their extras are quite sedate with indoor fixed cameras approach, and it's very effective. But what I really noticed about Unearthed and Untold is how much creative energy it injects into the talking heads method. The way it's structured is not to focus on one group at a time, say the actors, then the makeup artist, and then the fans. Instead, it just bundles everyone together in a series of logical sections, so we get a constant switch from person to person to person to person. It's not confusing or annoying. They give everybody ample space to speak. But the technique makes you feel that the film is always on the move. It's always got this dramatic sense. It's not just listening to a guy talk. Pet Sematary is a film, I'd say, which is buzzing with creativity and interesting visual flair, and it's cool that the documentary, therefore, takes so much time in this sort of multimedia approach. And what's more, the film is unashamed at celebrating the little people that were involved in the film. The lead actors are all present, the director herself is here, which is great, but there's a decent amount of time devoted to the extras, the bit players, the crew members. So the bundle of voices, both celebrities and everyday people, you end up getting this fascinating sense of community. You certainly get that impression from the film that the making of Pet Sematary was not your normal Hollywood experience, but rather it was local communities helping Hollywood make a movie. Now, the film goes into some detail about how Stephen King wanted Pet Sematary made in his home state of Maine, which wasn't a natural place for big studios to film in. But in the end, when these studios eventually decided to make the film Pet Sematary, and the road to getting the film made is a story in itself, which is featured at the beginning of the film, when they decided to do it, they did what King wanted and made it in Maine, which meant that the natural pool of extras and crew members shifted from the same old groups of LA to these fresh acting circles of other sides of on the other side of America. And that's one of the unexpected pleasures of the documentary. That's learning how much of a group local effort this horror film was. We hear from guys who drove the truck that plays an important part in the film, or a brilliant little touch, the elderly couple who let out the house that we see in the film, the Creed's house. We see them sitting in their kitchen talking about what it was like to have crowds of filmmakers on their lawn every day. They moved into a little house across the street apparently, but we learn about how the woman from this house would still come over and do her laundry in the big house even while production was happening. But we also get from the feeling from this film that the community gathered around it were genuinely excited about making a film on their turf. And I don't just mean that a Hollywood film crew with a few Hollywood actors were coming in and they were all starry-eyed. This was a Stephen King movie. And everybody knows that Stephen King is relentlessly championing the state of Maine. And so much of his novels are set there, but also he himself lives there and he enjoys life in the local communities there. I've always liked that about Stephen King, this sort of homespun nature of and the resistance and suspicion of Hollywood. So it's great to see the film that was made in his world on his terms. So you get a real sense of affection from the film that the locals had for Stephen King, but also the affection that they had for each other and their state. A sort of, everyone let's work together and we'll make something worthwhile. In fact, that same principle is seen in the guys who made this documentary, I'd say. Like I said, this isn't some DVD extras commissioned by a company, big company, or a TV special. It's a couple of everyday guys putting together a film on a cultural artifact that they love. The filmmakers, John Campopiano and Justin White, clearly have a passion for preserving moments in time. John is a digital records manager for the PBS investigative documentary called Frontline, but he also runs an organization that he founded called the New England Media and Memory Coalition. Justin White has worked for various local radio and television stations, and at the moment he works for WPRI TV Eyewitness News as a videographer and an editor. Basically, it's two guys who make a living from using video to log and record history. And so you get that sense from Unearthed and Untold. That is an extension of their work. They don't just see this film as important, just the film, but they see the process of making it, and particularly the people and the places involved, as worthy of being logged and remembered. So in the documentary we see families, children and the elderly joining together to make a movie. But then when we see what the product that these happy little gangs produced was so flipping, disturbing and dark, it's brilliant contradiction. These lovely, nice family folk made dark horror. I feel like this is almost like a microcosm of Stephen King himself. He always strikes me as a both warm and generous man, and yet twisted and macabre. And that's okay, he can hold those two things in balance, and that's what these locals do in the film too. All the people who are involved, they reminisce, you see these people looking back with great fondness and fun, despite the relentlessly bleak themes of the movie, which we'll explore more in the second episode. Another thing I liked about this documentary is that I genuinely learned stuff I never had learned before. I could list a bunch of trivia that I picked up from the film, but I don't want to spoil it for you, so I won't. But thankfully, the title does make sense. There's really a sense of unearthing the untold in this. Who knows, maybe I'm just ignorant of Pet Sematary facts, and maybe some of these facts are already out there, but there was a bunch of information that to me was totally new. The film also does a really good job of reminding us about how much effort goes into making horror movies, or I guess indeed any film for that matter. At one point we hear from a woman whose title is head greensman, and I'm like, huh? What's that? And thankfully she explains that she is the one who looks after the grass and makes the natural sets look atmospheric and spooky. And I thought, well, yeah, someone has to make sure the grounds around the houses and buildings look right. And you're like, yeah, of course someone would need to do that in a film. I guess it's little things like that that's a reminder of how much of a joint effort making a film is and how much is involved. Thankfully also the film is well shot with decent sound. I used to get really frustrated with DVD extras that would have interviews with, let's say, key horror icons like Dario Argento or Claudio Simonetti on some of the early Arrow releases I'm thinking in particular, and the sound would be rubbish and there'd be no lighting to speak of and it all looked like it was filmed on a VHS recorder, and I just squirm seeing these things thinking what they're saying is like too important and interesting to squander on these sorts of home video techniques. What's great about Arrow, by the way, just an aside, is that they've really improved their sound and lighting for extras, so the documentary stuff they do now looks brilliant. It's great. Thankfully, the makers of Unearthed and Untold appreciated the importance of clarity and quality, so the interviews are crisp and clear. And by the way, I certainly wish I could afford a decent camera to film these shows, but I'm afraid for now all I have is my iPhone, but I do try to get the best of sound anyway. Anyway, let's get back to the film. The film uses music extensively throughout to build atmosphere, and I suppose there may be some viewers who might find that annoying or something. They might like their documentaries with minimal soundtracks, but for me, I thought the music they used here is really effective. It's not the actual score from Pet Sematary. We'll talk more of Elliot Goldenthal's chilling soundtrack to Pet Sematary in the next episode. But the Creative Commons music they use in this, I thought, really builds the sense of tension and movement. And even, dare I say, there were moments in this documentary where itself was a bit creepy. Some of the hand-drawn artwork representing scenes from the film is well observed and unsettling, and so coupled with this relentless soundtrack music, the documentary itself even causes a chill or two. Now, Stephen King himself doesn't feature in this. If he had, that would have been even better. I mean, it would have made it perfect, really. But maybe they just couldn't get him. But they do feature him in a conference talking a little about the novel. But so it's not like his voice is not heard. But again, what I really liked about the film is that while the posters say this is Stephen King's Pet Sematary, you come away from the documentary thinking, actually, that's not fully accurate anymore. The book is Stephen King's, but the film, well, you almost want to put the names of all of the cast and the crew and the locals and the fans, and you want their names above the title, because in many ways this film really was a product of many, many minds coming together, not just Stephen King's. The film feels so exhaustive that it doesn't really explore the fandom that came up around the film. Some viewers may prefer to see that, perhaps. There are extras available on the disc edition, so perhaps they might go into the fandom side of Pet Sematary. They do touch on a little bit the legacy of it. Indeed, there was a sequel, of course, that's not looked at. There was a BBC radio adaptation of Pet Sematary that doesn't get mentioned. But then you really can't throw the net too wide, and so I think the film focuses down on what really matters, that is the book. I was really pleased it took time over the novel, by the way, which I read when I was young. I'll talk about that in the next episode. But also its main focus really is naturally the film, and that's not a shock to see that that's what it focuses on. And what we're left with then is an excellent, well-paced, informative, and I think well-made overview of a key horror film from the late 80s. However you see it, whether it's by the pre-order I mentioned earlier or if you wait till Halloween and catch it in the usual ways, I do hope you'll check it out. It's worth digging up however you can. Well, I'll be talking more about this documentary in the next episode, where I'll be offering my own take, my own exploration of the film itself, Pet Sematary. But until then, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or visit the website at theflicksthechurchforgot.com. But until then, pray for Fiddly Sticks, he's struggling. And don't forget, the flicks the church forgot.